Hey friends, I had been thinking about doing a video for some time on the topic of Milestone versus XP based experience point systems for Dungeons & Dragons when in the community Flicker Spriggs asked, what are your thoughts on gold for XP? Now, I never even heard of this as being an option for 5th edition, though I remember it somewhat fondly as a thief in 2nd edition. But essentially, the system that he was outlining was apparently used in a couple of other systems around and comes down to gold that you bring back to safety and you bank is the experience points that your character accrues. And so in order to get experience points, you need to go out there and loot, grab you some treasure. So I thought today in this Monday Musing we would touch on the topic of not only gold for XP, but XP versus milestones and as well. So we covered all three potential options that you might be thinking about using at your game. Because the short and the long answer really does boil down to it's about the kind of game you want to run. So each of these different types is going to give a different feel to the game. It's going to use different aspects of the game more than others, and it's going to reward certain behavior, which means it's going to drive action in a certain direction. We all know that video games are masters of the XP system, of giving those small dopamine hits that we get for getting experience points, level up at nice appropriate moments, and of course they drive us to do the things that they want us to do. Experience points in Dungeons & Dragons are no different. So let's start off by looking at Milestone XP. I used to think that Milestone XP was just the experience point system for lazy DMs. And don't get me wrong, I've used it that way before, just because I really didn't want to deal with all the extra stuff. But Milestone XP does have its place in our games, but it's a very specific place. Because essentially, when you are running a milestone game, then your main story is the only story that is really pushing forward the needle of reward for your players. Yes, they're going to be involved in the narrative, they are going to have the opportunity to choose side quests and the like, but if those side quests are not capable of leveling them up, eventually they're going to clue in that they have to follow the main plot in order to make any kind of advancement. If you're using milestones, at least as they've been presented in a lot of the adventure books that we're dealing with. So what that means is that side quests become less relevant. Individual actions that are made or methods that are used to go in any direction are never rewarded or punished, and the main story is pretty much all that applies for the characters. It's very story driven. It does always land your level up at a nice satisfying moment that fits the narrative, which is great, but it doesn't reward individual behavior. Meanwhile, the experience point system, if you're using it as is in the Dungeon Master's Guide and onwards, does need some work, to be sure. It rewards for the defeating of monsters as pretty much your primary, though you'll note in various supplements that that is not how it's intended to be used, even if that's the only truly defined portion of XP. Instead, you're supposed to be gaining XP for doing things in the world that are experience point worthy. And that's up to a DM to decide on a case-by-case basis, and it also means that it's up to the DM to decide the kind of play that they want to reward, and then by giving experience points for those things, giving out a detailed summary at the end, even if it's as simple as just saying you get 500 XP each for defeating the dragon, and you get 75 XP for each of the prisoners that you managed to keep safe in the dragon's lair during that massive battle. That tells your players that saving people is something that the world rewards, which means that heroism is something that they should practice more of, even if they do it in their own strange way. Experience points allows you to get granular, it allows you to set what is important, and it rewards equally for side quests that you're passing along as it does for the main quest, unless of course you're offering bonuses for finishing those main quests, which in turn can drive play in the direction that you want. It's a nuanced system that gives you a lot of control over what your players see as valuable. What it does lack is that same narrative-based, story-driven, this is the perfect time to level up, unless you are very, very careful about how you're calculating your experience points. People are going to level up at times that maybe might not seem significant, and it doesn't feel like as much of a reward for finishing that main plot. However, if you're giving a big chunk of XP, you can somewhat control how that's going to happen, and sometimes it's okay not to be in control of those things too. So it's a little more individually driven, but it doesn't fit the story and narrative like Milestone does. Finally, the idea of banking gold in order to get experience points. Basically, what this system is doing is the same as what the normal experience point system does, in that it is driving play towards the kind of behavior that you're seeking. It's something that worked really well back in older editions of Dungeons & Dragons, because the idea of a D&D game was not about a specific story per se, but was more about these massive mega dungeons and the idea of people going out, delving in, getting rich, thus getting famous, and then moving into a bastion system where you controlled some kind of place and you sent forth war game armies against each other using a completely supplementary book and all sorts of stuff. It gets weird. But basically, you went into these dungeons and the story of the dungeon was not as important as was the raiding of the dungeon and the maximizing of the loot that you could bring back to civilization. If you use the XP system where gold equals experience points when you bank it away, that's pretty much the kind of game that you're driving for. You may still, just like with Milestones, have side quests and stories. You may have a main plot like other systems do as well, but your player's focus is going to be that reward is for gold. So if they can find things, if they can maximize their treasure, they'll grab every penny that they can. They'll be working to create systems that allow them to not waste money, and everything is going to be fixated on that all-important dollar. That's not bad if that's the kind of game that you're trying to run, and all three systems have their place. Basically, as I said at the beginning, it boils down to what kind of game do you want to run.